Unless you're still full from Thanksgiving, which... How many of y'all ate pie for breakfast the next morning? Am I the only one? It was okay. Well, honestly, I didn't know. It was like a thing going around Facebook about pie for breakfast. And I was like, that's a fantastic idea. Why have I never thought of this before? And I don't think we've had it since we've been here, but if one of these days at a potluck or something, I'll try to talk Cher into making it. She makes this dessert. It's I think, is it a Pampered Chef? Yeah, recipe, but it's called Cool and Creamy Mint Torte. Basically, it's like chocolate fluff with Cool Whip and mint, and it's just delicious. And it's like cold, and it cuts like a pie. It has like an Oreo crust. It is heaven. And it's great for breakfast and goes well with milk. So, you can have pie or whatever. We're continuing our discussion on Esther. Today will actually be the last lesson in this series. We'll start a Christmas series next Sunday, looking at what I'm calling Christmas cards. Christmas cards from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we'll get a late one after Christmas from John because he's kind of not on top of things sometimes. But we're going to finish up Esther today in a way that's I don't think it's going to feel like we're flying. I hope not. But we're going to go over several chapters because the story of Esther turns on kind of this hairpin. All this stuff has been building up, and today we're going to see when the whole story just turns. And when that story turns, the dominoes just begin to fall, one after another, after another, after another. But first, let me tell you a story about a guy named David Simmons. In his book, Living with Dreams, he tells of his experience as a missionary in the 1950s. He's in India, and he takes a train ride to meet with some other missionaries for a meeting. And it's just like a quick meeting. I mean, it's a several hour or more train ride that he takes. But he's just taking this train ride. He's going to meet with some people for a few hours, and he's going to take the train right back the same day. And so he doesn't take anything with him. And on this train ride, as they're going, the train suddenly stops on the tracks. And they hear that there's been a derailment up ahead. And so the train backs up a couple of miles and stops at this little teeny tiny, lonely, in the middle of nowhere train station and stays there until the next day. They spend a whole day in this itty-bitty little train station, and while he's there, he has absolutely nothing to do. He's bored out of his mind. There's a little like snack shop that's there, but even the magazines and the newspaper are all written in languages that he doesn't know. Well, the shopkeeper recognizes his plight, or maybe he talks to him or something, and he ends up offering him a book called Atlas Shrugged. It's an 1,100-page book of all kinds of anti-Christian philosophy and all this other kind of stuff. Like the worst book that a missionary ever wants to spend his time reading. One, I don't know how many of y'all have ever read an 1,100-page book, like on purpose. I've probably been assigned one in school sometime and managed to skim through it or found the movie, right? But an 1,100-page book, but he's bored, and so he just reads it. He reads it and he reads it, and it's just completely miserable. It was a nightmare, but he was so bored he spent the day reading that book. Now, have you ever had a day like this missionary? A day with all these circumstances and coincidences and just weird stuff that happens, and it just kind of turns out to be a miserable day, or maybe it's been a miserable week. Sometimes it ends up being a miserable month or maybe even a miserable year. And you can't really put your finger on it, but all these different kinds of things, these series of unrelated events, seems to toss you to and fro. When we read the book of Esther, we've talked in the last several weeks about asking a question about the characters in the story. How are these characters like me? How does everybody in the story, not just the good guys, but how am I sometimes like the king? How am I sometimes like Esther or like Mordecai? How am I sometimes like Haman? Whatever it may be, that's the purpose of a lot of these biblical stories, is for us to look at these characters and pull out the pieces of them that that relate to us or speak to our lives and our situations or our behaviors, our thoughts, and things like that. But the other thing that we should do is the story as a whole is look at the story of Esther and see how does it relate to or compare or shed light on my story. How does the story of Esther speak to my life? How does it reveal things in my life today? And so far, Esther has been a lot like our missionary friend who spent a day at a lonely railroad station in a foreign country reading a miserable book. I'm not saying Esther's been miserable, but we've been going through and it just seems like one bad thing after another, after another, after another, and you're kind of like, well, what's the purpose of this book? This strange series of coincidences. Or is it? Is it a strange series of coincidences, or is it something else that we might label as providence? And so that's the question for us to try to wrestle with this morning, is looking at the book of Esther, looking at the story and looking at how it unfolds. Is it all just happenstance? Is it all just surprising coincidence? How convenient that all these things worked out the way they did? Or is it providence? Has this been God's involvement in Esther's life, or was it just a bunch of coincidence? We ask ourselves these same questions about our lives. Did God want me in my life? Did God want me in that particular place at that particular time? Or how Mordecai said it to Esther, for such a time as this. Esther, he goes, I don't know. I don't know for sure, but maybe you're the queen right now, at this time, for such a time as this, for such a situation like this. So far, excuse me, so far we've had a drunken pushover of a king who deposes and discards the queen. Coincidence or providence? We've had a one-night stand with the king beauty contest. We've had Mordecai, who's told Esther to hide her identity, both as a Jew and as a person of faith. And Esther, this Jewish woman who ends up becoming queen of the most powerful empire in the world at the time. Coincidence or providence? An edict has been written and distributed to the land to kill all the Jews on a particular date, several days or several months in the future. Mordecai tells Esther about this edict and warns her that her royal position will not save her. And he asks her to go to the king unannounced. And Esther tells Mordecai, she says, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, because there was a real threat of her perishing. You don't just go before the king. She says, if I perish, I perish. But why is Esther in this position? Is it coincidence or is it providence? And the reason we can ask ourselves, and there's lots of reasons why we can, but why we should ask ourselves the questions about coincidence and providence in the book of Esther is because the book of Esther is a lot like our lives sometimes. I mentioned before at the very beginning, God is not even mentioned in the book. Scripture is not even mentioned in the book. Any kind of religious action. I mean, they talk about fasting a little bit, but there's no clear, thing. Is this definitely a religious thing? But God's not even mentioned. And so we ask ourselves, why is this story in the Bible? Well, because a lot of times that's the way our lives are, right? We go about our days, living our lives, and things happen. There's no message from God. There's no dove that comes down and lands on your shoulder and says, yes, turn left, don't turn right. None of that stuff happens to us. And so we're left wondering, where is God acting in our lives? Is God acting in our lives? And when can I put my finger and go, yeah, that's God acting, and other times that we maybe shouldn't? And so we'll try to explore that this morning. Let's go through some text here to kind of get our story wrapped up where we are. We're in Esther chapter 5. We'll be starting in verse 1. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. And when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her, and he held out the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the scepter. That was his way of pardoning her, because if you come to the king unannounced, there is but one law, they said in the previous chapter, and that is that you be put to death. You don't just go to the king, unless he holds out this scepter, which he did. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom," he says, "it will be given to you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." So, immediately, the king and Haman go to this banquet that Esther has prepared. And while drinking and enjoying themselves, the king asks Esther again. He says, "What is it you want? What is your petition? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted to you." And she only asks him one thing. She says, "Will you and Haman come to my banquet tomorrow? And then I'll answer the king's question." Now, I don't know if Esther's delaying. I suspect, based on what we've heard in the previous parts of the book of Esther and what the king and the kingdom is like, if you remember, it started off with this 6-month party. They had the 6-month party with a whole lot of drinking and a whole lot of eating, and that was a whole lot of it, right? And then after that, after 6 months of that, they had a 1-week-long after party. And everybody knows the after party is where the real party is. And they spent a whole lot of time drinking. And so it may be, as they're enjoying their beverages at Esther's banquet, that she's, I don't know, loosening the king up. He seems to make all his best decisions while he's somewhat inebriated. That's the kind of king he is, so maybe that's her play here. Maybe she's just delaying. I don't know, but either way, she asked him, "Come to this second banquet." So Haman, who's the bad guy in this story, the really, really bad guy, he goes home super happy, right? He goes home, he's all excited. This is what it said in says in verse 9. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But once again, as he passed through the gate, when he sees Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, he restrained himself and he went home. When Haman gets home, what he ends up doing is bragging to his family about how cool he is, how great he is, and how awesome he is. He got to go to the king's banquet, or the queen's banquet with the king. No one else was invited, just the king and me. The king has elevated me. I am higher than all the other nobles. I have more sons than anybody else. I have more money than anybody else. I have more stature than anybody else. I am literally like the coolest person in the kingdom next to the king. And so he's bragging on himself. However, none of this, he says, brings him any joy as long as that guy Haman continues to not rise when he walks by. This one little thing, he's not satisfied with all the good stuff in his life. This one guy who refused to show him some honor for some reason just irritates him so much that he can't enjoy anything. Well, so then his wife and his friends make a suggestion to him. This is a fantastic suggestion. You might want to write this down next time somebody irritates you. They say, have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 75 feet, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it, and then go to the king in the banquet and enjoy yourself. Isn't that a great suggestion? I don't know how many of you guys have a 75-foot pole at home. I mean, a 10-foot pole might work. I mean, no, don't do that. But this is the kind of community these people are living in. Remember, this edict has already been written to destroy all the Jews several months in the future. And the reason this edict has been written is because Haman is so irritated at Mordecai. He's so irritated that killing Mordecai isn't enough. Not that that's a great thing to do, but he could just kill Mordecai and then be rid of him. No, he's got to kill Mordecai and all of Mordecai's people. That's the kind of person Haman is. But he's still irritated because the months haven't come around yet to, when this edict's going to take effect, and they can go kill all these people that they don't like. Well, they tell him, set up this pole and go in the morning and ask the king if you can impale Haman or impale Mordecai. Just be rid of him now. Why wait 6 more months? Let's just get rid of him now. And he thinks, you know what? That is a really, really good idea. I don't have to wait 6 more months. When we kill the rest of the Jews, I could just kill Haman tomorrow. And so let's do this. Let's get the pole set up, and tomorrow morning I'll go talk to the king. And so that's exactly what happens. He's so delighted with the idea, he has a pole set up. Well, I guess while they're setting up this pole, and later that evening, beginning of chapter 6 happens, that night the king could not sleep. He couldn't sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought to him and to be read. This is like asking someone, like, you can't sleep tonight, so why don't you come and bring all the congressional meeting notes and just read them to me, right? All the filibusters where they just talk and talk and talk to try to take up time for no apparent reason. Bring that and read that to me. I'm sure after you read it for a while, I will fall asleep. It was found, recorded there, that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Now, we didn't go over this back in chapter 2, so let's look at it real quick. So we're going to rewind for a second, all the way back to chapter 2, shortly after Esther became queen. Chapter 2, verse 21. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, this is during the time when Esther had just become queen. He's sitting at the king's gate. Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. We're going to get some T-shirts made. This is the precursor, though, to crucifixion. You know, there's no crucifixion stuff. This is what they did then. They impaled people on poles. Later, crucifixion comes in. But anyway, so they say, they find out that this is true, and they impale them on poles. And this was all recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So this event happens. It's all recorded in the Chronicles. Is this coincidence, or is this providence? Something's going on here. The king is being reminded of these events as he's sleeping or trying to sleep this night, and they're reading this book of Chronicles to him. And he says, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? And they say nothing. Nothing has been done for him. And right about this time, guess who comes walking in the door? It's the next morning. King hasn't slept all night. He's read these Chronicles. He found out about Mordecai. Nothing's been done for him. Who walks in? Haman. Haman shows up on the scene. It's early in the morning. He's come to ask the king about impaling Mordecai on his pole. He arrives early in the morning just as the king is learning that no honor or recognition has been given to Mordecai. Coincidence or providence? So the king calls Haman in. He says, hey, who's in the courtyard? And they're like, well, Haman just showed up. Get him in here. Hey, get Haman in here. And so King asks Haman, who's completely unaware of what the king's been reading that night. The king asks, he says, what should be done for the man who the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? Oh Haman, your pride has made you so blind. So he answers the king. He says, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on this horse's head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Haman thinks he is setting himself up for the greatest parade ever. And the king says, that's a great idea. Go at once. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested to Mordecai the Jew. Haman probably had to spend some time picking his chin up off the ground as the king's words left his mouth. He says, do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman, in humiliation, ends up parading Mordecai all over the city, going, this is what is done for the man who the king delights to honor. And he's doing this all over town. Coincidence or providence? It gets better. After parading Mordecai all over town, Haman returns home with his tail between his legs, and he's whining and crying to his family, to his wife, to his friends. He's like, oh, miserable me, look what happened, look what happened. And as he's complaining, though, the king's eunuchs come and get him and whisk him away to the queen's banquet. It's now the next day. It's time for the second banquet. And so they whisk him away to go to this banquet. And at this banquet again, the king asks Esther, "What is your petition? What is your request?" He says, "It will be given to you." What is it? Just tell me, and we'll do it. Then Queen Esther answers. She says, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated." And the king is like, he asks Esther, he says, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" And Queen Esther says, "He is an adversary, he is an enemy." And then she points across the table and says, "It's this vile Haman." Can you imagine? Haman's downfall started just a little bit ago as the dominoes began to fall one after another. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king got up in a rage and he left his wine and went out into the palace garden. But Haman realized that the king had already decided his fate. He stayed to beg Queen Esther for his life. And just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman, while he's begging for his life, trips and falls over onto the couch, basically onto the queen. The king walks in and sees Haman flopping over on top of the queen. He's just like, "What is going on? Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in my own house?" It is just getting from worse to terribly, terribly bad for Haman. And as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. They put a bag over his head. They drug him away. And then one of the eunuchs attending the king says, "Hey, you know what? There's a pole set up at Haman's house, 75 feet tall, that he had erected for the sole purpose of impaling Haman." Haman, the guy the king delights to honor, the guy that found out that people were going to try to assassinate you and saved your life, that guy, Haman, was going to impale him on this pole. And the king says, "Well, go and impale him on it." And so they impaled Haman on this pole that had previously been set up for Mordecai. Coincidence or providence? Coincidence or providence? That is the burning question in the book of Esther, because God is not given any direct credit. Is this just a bunch of coincidence, or is this providence? And this burning question is the same burning question in our daily lives. The things that happen to us, is this coincidence or is this providence? Is it luck? Is it just dumb happenstance, or is this God's perfect involvement in the lives of imperfect people? The same questions that we need to ask ourselves today, or that we do ask ourselves. How do I tell the difference? That's really the burning question. How do I tell the difference between coincidence and providence? I can tell you what we tend to do. What we tend to do is say, if it's good, that's defined as I enjoy it. If I enjoy it, then it must be providence. And if it's something else, then maybe it's just bad coincidence. I don't know, but we want to know, is God active in our lives, or is it just dumb luck? Here's the difference between coincidence and providence. First off, coincidence can be, it can be positive, it can be like a pleasant thing. Coincidence can be negative, it can be a bad thing, or coincidence can be kind of indifferent in the middle. Here's some examples. Coincidence is pleasant when you get in your car, you turn on your radio, and your favorite song is on. Like you were just humming it, walking out to your car, you get in your car and you click it on, you're like, my favorite song is on from the latest Frozen 2 movie, yay! Right? Or one of maybe some old friends, you're at the airport, you're traveling for the holidays, you go to the airport, and maybe an old friend that you haven't seen in years and years and years happens to be at your same airport, and you both happen to have a layover that's long enough that you could sit down and kind of catch up. It's pleasant. It's coincidence, but it's pleasant and it's enjoyable. We might call that stuff good. Coincidence can also be very negative. Two cars coincidentally show up at the same intersection at the exact same time. A collision happens. Property is damaged. people are injured, and sometimes people are killed. That would be a very negative coincidence. We would label that for sure as bad. Coincidence can also be indifferent. A matter of chance that makes no real difference in one's life one way or another. You know, you flip open a book and I just happened to open it to the page I was looking for. That's a kind of, it wouldn't make any difference if I had to turn 3 pages later and go, okay, there I am. It just doesn't make any difference in life. Or a person I was just planning to call on my phone. As I pick up my phone to call them, they're calling me. Hey, isn't that neat? It's just coincidence, but it's kind of neat, but it's really indifferent. It wouldn't have made any difference in my life one way or another if those things would have or wouldn't have happened. Here's the difference when it comes to providence. Providence is always good. Providence is always good, and it has clear purpose and meaning. Providence is this: it is the fulfillment of God's purpose. So you can have a positive and good coincidence that may have nothing to do with God's purpose. It's good, it's neat, it's enjoyable, it's pleasurable, that's cool. But when it comes to providence, providence is always fulfilling God's purpose. You can see His hand at work in it. And here's the bottom line when it comes to providence versus coincidence. Coincidence only becomes providence when God's goodwill is revealed. Coincidence only becomes providence when God's goodwill is revealed. And what I mean by that is, just because something is good or pleasurable shouldn't make us automatically say, oh, that's the providence of God because I enjoy it. Right? Is God's actions always defined by whether or not I enjoy them? No, I can tell you not. There's some stuff in here that I'm like, man, I really wish that wasn't in there because I don't enjoy that part. Or whatever. Romans 8:28 is kind of one of those verses that I think is difficult in this kind of area when we talk about coincidence or providence. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those that love Him. Right? And I've had people use this, and I would encourage you probably to not use this in difficult and trying situations. When something happens that is negative, that is a burden, that is emotional, that is tragic, they'll be like, well, God uses all things to the good of those that love Him. That is not the time to say that verse to anybody. It's just not helpful. It may be true, but it's just not helpful in the moment. Here's what it says: God works for the good of His people. It does not say all things are from God. You see the difference? It doesn't say that all things are from God. We live in a fallen world. We live in a fallen world where things are not always the way they're supposed to be. That's why we talk about partnering with God and others to help make the world a little more the way it's supposed to be. But the truth is, the world is not the way it's supposed to be. That's why we pray, may your will be done on earth just like it is in heaven. Because guess what? God's will isn't always done on earth. And so it doesn't say that all things are from God. It says, but through them somehow, I don't know, this is part of the mystery of God, that God works for the good. In all these things, whether it be pleasant coincidences, indifferent coincidences, or negative coincidences, somehow God works through them for good. God may use today's coincidence for His later providence. Coincidence only becomes providence when God's goodwill is revealed. And if God's goodwill has not been revealed, then we really can't say that it's providence, at least not yet. To summarize the last 2 or 3 chapters of Esther, Haman's estate is given to Esther to do with as she wants. We might say it's providence. It might just be coincidence. I mean, it's good. The king gave Mordecai his signet ring and told him and Esther to write another decree however they saw fit to counteract this kill the Jews decree. I would say that is providence. That's God working to the good of His people. The new decree gives the Jews the right to assemble and defend themselves. I would say that's providence. That's God working for the good of His people. And the Jewish people end up prevailing over their enemies. I would call that providence. God working for the good of His people, that they might prevail. The missionary we talked about earlier who went on this train ride that kind of, took too long. The missionary was not thankful for the book he read. He didn't enjoy it. He didn't like it. There was nothing about it that seemed to be the providence of God in his life. It was just misery and pain. However, 10 years later, an Indian student comes to this missionary and begins to talk to him and ask him questions. And the problem this young student is having is he's got a lot of intellectual questions about Christianity that he can't resolve. And guess where he got these questions from? He got it from an 1,100-page book he had read called Atlas Shrugged. And then he was amazed to find out that this missionary had actually read that book. And so immediately there was a rapport established between the two. He was able to ask questions. The missionary understood where these questions were coming from, and they were able to work through and talk through these things. And this young man ends up becoming a faithful Christian, all from an 1,100-page book on some anti-Christian philosophy and whatnot and whatever. It wasn't until 10 years later, in the moment, he would have said, the missionary did say, that basically this is all just some negative coincidence. I'm stuck in this train station. I didn't bring anything to do or read. The only thing that's in my language is this 1,100-page miserable book that a missionary probably needs to spend no time reading. And he remembers it as really just a really, really bad day back in the past. Fast forward 10 years, and the providence of God working in his life in a way that seems like I don't understand how and why any of this would connect to each other. God says, I'm going to use that moment because there's a young man who's read that same book that needs somebody to talk to. And through God's providence, he ends up bringing them together. It took 10 years before he could see God's will working in his life. The book of Esther, the events in the book of Esther last over a period of somewhere between 7 and 10 years. This missionary story takes 10 years for things to be revealed. Friends, I want you to know that God does work in your life. God is working in your life. And I encourage you to be patient because God is working for good. There are coincidences in our life that have nothing to do with God. They're probably part of our fallen world, and they happen to us. They're not enjoyable. Some of them are, but some of them are downright terrible. It doesn't mean that God is not here and that God is not working, but we should be patient. We should trust God. The story of Esther and the story of the missionary show us that in the future, when God's goodwill is revealed, we will know then for sure what was providence and what was just coincidence. But we need to be patient. We need to wait on God. We need to trust in God. Don't be quick to turn away from God or to think that God isn't there. And let me leave you with one last verse. It's funny, we don't use a lot of verses from the book of Lamentations. But in the book of Lamentations is this verse that says, "The Lord is good to those who wait for Him." The Lord is good to those who wait for Him. A miserable book that this guy had read 10 years before. Queen Esther, going through all the garbage that her and Mordecai and the rest of the people that lived in Persia went through. But God managed to use those, not that all these bad situations and circumstances were from God, but God was able to use them in positive ways eventually in their life. God is working for the good in your life. It may not happen as fast as you want it to, but know that God is eternally interested in what is truly, truly good for you. That's my encouragement to you, is be patient. Be patient and wait for God. He's working. That's what I think the book of Esther tells. Let's pray and we'll be done. Lord, I thank you for blessing us, and I thank you for revealing your will to us, when and how you choose to do so. I thank you for using the events in our lives, whether they be positive, negative, or indifferent coincidences in our lives, and using them in different ways to bring about your will. Help us to understand and to know that all these things aren't always from you, that these negative happenstances, that even some of the good and neat things that happen in our lives, they may not be from you. We're thankful for the good things in our life, whether they're from you or they're from just a coincidence. And we pray that even though the hardships will come our way, we do pray that you will use them. That you will use them and that you will work your will through them. And that if it be your will, Lord, that you will reveal that will to us and that we might know that your providence has been there all along. And if not in this life, then we know for sure in the next. And we thank you for your Son. We thank you for his work to follow your will, for his willingness to die in our place, the greatest act of providence that this world has ever seen. Help us to cherish that moment and to be thankful for it and to carry that with us every day as we interact with other people, that we might be Jesus, the people we see in our lives. Forgive us when we fall short and help us to do better. In your Son's name we pray. Thank you all for being here. Be blessed.